Good afternoon, seventh grade. Hey, we're going to be talking about World War II today. We actually got it taken off yesterday. We talked about the September 1st, 1939, the invasion of Poland. That was the beginning of World War II, and then the day that America entered the war would have been December 7th, 1941, with the attack of Pearl Harbor. So that's where we're going to pick up today with starting the course of the war and how things went for a while. Forgot to stop my timer. Okay, listen carefully throughout the video and take your notes. Remember, you can get the whole notes, original PowerPoint, on the opening page, on the classwork page of our Google Classroom. But if you use your handwritten notes, you may use those on your quiz that you take afterwards. Make sure you fill in the blanks on the notes and add things that will help you understand the material, not just writing down exactly word for word what's on the slide. The other thing I want to tell you is make sure you watch the video all the way to the end, because at the end I'm going to give you an unusual fact to use on your quiz, okay? All right, so we are doing Roman numeral 2, the course of the war. Here is our map that we're using so far. Excuse me, let me change this so you can see it bigger. There we go. Now, everything in this orangey color is controlled by Germany at the height of World War II, okay? So you can see they had a lot of territory. They even controlled part of France. By the time America enters the war, most of France has fallen to the Germans and they're in control. Spain will remain neutral. Sweden remains neutral, as does Switzerland and Turkey, Saudi Arabia. But the rest of these are all controlled by Hitler and Mussolini. Great Britain, of course, is the lone exception, as is most of Russia. But when they controlled this part of Russia, that's pretty bad. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so let's talk first about Western Europe. Germany invades in the early days of the war after taking over Poland. They invade Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, and Belgium. All of them. And they take them easily. They do this thing that they call lightning war. I forget what the name of it is. It's just escaped me. I hate it when that happens. It's Blitzkrieg. Sorry, I knew I'd come up with it. Blitzkrieg, which is lightning war, where they send in planes, ground troops, tanks, everything. They just kind of attack a country really hard up front, and they overrun it very easily. The thing you're gonna be reading tomorrow about the Battle of Dunkirk, and there is a new movie out. I like the movie. It's not perfect, and it doesn't do the story of Dunkirk justice. But at the point that Germany has invaded all of these countries, and the British and French troops are actually trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk. Sorry, that's my power blinked. They're trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk, and they need rescued. This is the end of May of 1940. America's not yet in the war yet. There's hundreds of thousands of troops trapped on the beach there at Dunkirk, just across the English Channel from England. These are British and French troops. They're trapped. They can't get out. They're going to be destroyed by the German troops that are behind them. For some reason, at this point, the German troops decide not to go forward, and I'll explain that on the next slide. I just want to pause here a minute and let those of you who are writing live, be able to do so. But they did escape in providential weather, so I'll come back to that in just a minute. Okay, so Hitler decided he wanted the Luftwaffe, or his Air Force, rather than the army, to destroy those British and French forces that were on the beaches there at Dunkirk. So he wanted the Luftwaffe to do it, the Air Force. Okay, so the Air Force is going to attack. The problem is, okay, so let me back up to a few days before the actual rescue. This is the end of May. It's right around what would be Memorial Day today. The British see this coming, and the British Prime Minister is Winston Churchill. And he goes to the King of England, who is George VI, who was the father of the current Queen, Queen Elizabeth II. And he tells George VI, he says, look, this is what's going to happen. If this is what happens, we're going to lose like 90% of our forces, and we're going to be toast. We're not going to be able to recover from this. So George is he's a praying man. He's a religious man. I wouldn't say he's a Christian. I don't know that for sure. But he calls on the people to have a day of prayer. So on May 25th, 26th, somewhere in there of that year, all of England turns out for this day of prayer. And they ask God to rescue their soldiers from this situation. Statewide, countrywide, there's not room in all the churches to fill for all the people that want to go. Okay, there are people standing in line waiting to get into church. Day of prayer. The next day, they're going to start sending boats across the English Channel to pick up as many soldiers as they can. And they're hoping, well, maybe we can rescue 30,000 troops. Maybe. So the next day, a fog settles in. That's not that unusual, but it means that the Luftwaffe cannot get off the ground. They can't take off in fog. Can't see where you're going. Okay? So the Luftwaffe can't get off the ground. There's heavy fog. The channel, which is that body of water between England and France, is normally very, very rough. It's very choppy, and you cannot sail it easily. But that morning, perfectly calm, completely at peace. Hundreds and hundreds of British people grab their boats, whatever boats they've got, whether it be a small little fishing boat or a large sea vessel, whatever, they grab their boats and they sail across the channel on that perfect calm. They pick up as many soldiers as they can and they take them back. And they keep doing this all day. England successfully rescues over 300,000 soldiers from that beach. It was a true miracle. It's so neat to see how God can provide miracles today, as he did then, and as he did in biblical times. A true miracle at Dunkirk. And you're going to read about it tomorrow in your lesson. Okay, but eventually France does still fall to Germany. And Germany installs this sort of puppet government where Hitler's really controlling everything. Many people reject that government. And there is a little element in the south of France of people who are trying to help overthrow Hitler. Still, they're still there, and they're loyal to the original French government. We also at this point have the bombing, the bombing of Britain, where the Luftwaffe every day comes in and flies planes over Britain dropping bombs. If you've seen the movie, The Chronicles of Narnia, the first one, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that book is set in during the bombing of Britain, where the kids are sent out of town because the parents don't want them to be in England, in London, when it's being bombed. The Royal Air Force had great success in the bombing of Britain, and their resolve, their continued purposeful living through the bombing of Britain made Hitler eventually give up, and he realized he was not going to take Britain that way. Okay. Russia invaded eastern Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. These are three countries that are in the northern part of Eastern Europe. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and Poland, they're all in the Eastern Europe. Invaded them and took them over. But remember, Russia had signed an agreement with Hitler, saying that they wouldn't invade each other. And I told you that Hitler never intended to keep that, neither did Stalin. Well, Hitler's the first one to attack. Germany finally decides that they want the resources of the Soviet Union. So they attack the Soviet Union. They send 3 million troops into the Soviet Union. But the problem is, Russia is enormous, okay? It had an 1,800-mile line of border with Germany. And so 3 million troops, that's not a whole lot when you compare it with the amount of territory that they had to cover. But the Germans get in there. It's a very, 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 very cold winter. They're not prepared for it. The Russians are burning everything as they retreat. So they leave no supplies for the Germans to get. They leave no housing for the Germans to get. So eventually the Germans are going to be forced to surrender. But it's going to cost an enormous amount of lives in both Russia and in German lives. All right, so North Africa. This is the first place that Americans are going to fight in World War II. Italy had already conquered, remember, the countries of Ethiopia, and they're going to attempt to spread themselves from there. Egypt is under the control of Britain at this point because Britain has been controlling the Suez Canal. So they have partial control in Egypt. So the British expel the Italians from Egypt. They start running them back, but then the Germans send in a guy named Erwin Rommel to rescue the Italians and help the Italians defeat the British. But eventually the Americans do land in North Africa, and with the American help and the British help, they're able to defeat the Axis forces there, the Italians and Germans in North Africa, and send them back into Europe. In the Pacific, I'm sorry I'm going so fast, I know it is. American forces eventually were forced out of the Philippines. That was an American territory that, we were helping control in the Philippines since World War I, but we had to abandon the Philippines for a while the Japanese took over. But at that point, the Japanese had gotten to the point that they had conquered more land than they could easily defend. Because remember, these are tiny islands, and you can't leave the tiny island alone. You have to put soldiers on that island. So eventually you get your soldiers spread so thin across such a vast area that they couldn't defend it. But there are 2 key battles I want you to remember about the Pacific. They are, first of all, the Battle of the Coral Sea. The Battle of the Coral Sea was the first air-sea battle in history. The first air-sea battle in history. No land, okay? No land. It's just the Japanese forces on aircraft carriers with planes, and the American forces with aircraft carriers and planes attacking each other. Okay, there was no land involved. That's the first time in history that ever happened. The second battle I want you to remember is the Battle of Midway Island. This was another American territory, and the reason this one is significant is that the U.S. code breakers broke the Japanese code. They knew the battle was coming, and they were able to attack first before the Japanese expected it. And that meant that we got a little bit of an upper hand, and we were able to advance and win that battle. Very key battle. Again, a new movie has recently come out on the Battle of Midway. I watched it a couple weeks ago with my family. It's pretty decent. I'm not sure that I would recommend it for your age group. You'd have to check with your parents and see if it's okay on that. And we will talk more about World War II movies later. Okay, that is the end of my video for today. I would really have loved to have talked about the Doolittle Raiders, but I am out of time, so I will not do so today. Maybe I'll mention it tomorrow. The other thing I want to tell you is your interesting fact of the day, which is the man who invented the Frisbee, when he died, he had himself cremated, and he had himself turned into a Frisbee. Weird, right? I know, it's very weird. But wanted to share that with you, and I will